Ako po si Jonathan Corpus Ong, professor and researcher sa Disinformation dito sa University of Massachusetts Amherst and sa Harvard University. And dati din po akong guro sa Ateneo de Manila, and I'm a community and policy engaged researcher. I've been studying disinformation since 2016. So as a communication professor, my training and my PhD is in sociology. And so, yung approach ko sa pag-aaral ng disinformation ay sa critical na pamamaraan, interesado sa perspectives ng ordinary people and marginalized communities. And I also study disinformation from the perspective of political economy, using interview methodology to interview so-called trolls, whom I understand and engage with as first and foremost digital workers. So I've been wanting to study workers in the disinformation economy to understand their motivations, their various work arrangements, and their different economic and also personal entrepreneurial motivations and their moral dilemmas and justifications as well. So I think for those of you who might know my writing, um, I started with a study, Architects of Network Disinformation, which was a study of the 2016 elections. I also have a recent book called Trolls for Sale that develop and extract excerpts from Architects of Network Disinformation, and that's available. And I also have other studies that have been published by NATO, Harvard, Internews, and other outlets. And I hope that you can find time to access them. My research is available on open access through my linktree/John C. Ong. And so I look forward to also clarifying any questions that you might have, and feel free to connect with me on my social media platforms. So for this video presentation, I'll be sharing highlights from a very recent study. It's a collaborative study published by Harvard University and launched in Cambridge, Massachusetts in October 2022. And so my video today will be discussing key insights about the state of disinformation in our information ecosystem at large in the Philippines in 2022. Pero hindi lang po ito diagnosis. I'll also be presenting a plan of action, and myself and my collaborators are calling it the Community Engagement Plan. This functions as an invitation for creatives, for writers, researchers, content creators, and platforms to take forward our suggestions and insights, and also enable people to develop their own creative interventions. So we're really interested to collaborate with new voices and new researchers and creatives. And so ilalahad po ng presentation today ang various examples of interventions that we think are super important to advance moving forward to address what we are calling our parallel public spheres. So, our most recent study is entitled Parallel Public Spheres Influence Operations in the 2022 Philippine Elections. So, yung aking research team, gusto kong pasalamatan sila. They are 5 Filipino researchers, and they're based in various locations in the academy. So, 3 of our co-authors, J.M. Lanuza, Rosine Falarina, Ferdinand Sanchez II. They are early career academics, and it's exciting to showcase their work and their criticality and creativity, right? For young Filipinos engaged in critical disinformation studies. Our co-author, and she is well known to many of us, Professor Nicole Corato, is based in Australia, and she is a specialist on public sphere responses to influence operations from the standpoint of deliberative democracy. So our report is published in both English and Filipino, and we're especially proud that the Harvard website houses both the bilingual reports, and the Filipino translation work is done by Elmer Gatchalian, who actually volunteered his expertise to us as he learned about our research during the election cycle. And so we're excited to offer this translation, and we translated parallel public spheres to mga mundo na hindi magtagpo. And you can browse mediamanipulation.org, and this link and this study is available also via my link tree. And you can see this is the Harvard website, mediamanipulation.org, that houses this study. And again, it's available for free download. This study was launched in October with former Vice President Leni Robredo, who opened up recently about how she felt about the findings of the research, having been a target of various influence operations herself. Let's hear it from her.
Medyo nakakalungkot yung resulta ng research. So ano yung mga important points of the research? That number one, some advertising and PR executives of some boutique PR consulting firms, some, hindi lahat, mas marami naman yung hindi kasali, are the ones who engage with political actors. Number two, mid-level operators who execute strategies and distill them into central messages. Ito yung pangalawang level. And yung pangatlo, the rank and file army of trolls, each with several fake accounts, alam na natin ito, who apply their creative energies to distribute these messages across the online spaces. It is these trolls that have infiltrated communities, pages, and groups in the Philippines by, number one, seeding memes and messages. Number two, resharing talking points from so-called influencers. Number three, tapping on reactions. And number four, commenting on each other, sometimes with copy-pasted texts, driving up engagement and thus the virality of specific online content. They are organized, they have set strategies and objectives, they are well-funded, and they have shattered social media as a space for political discourse in the Philippines. And the sad part about it is they are not yet done. In a new just released study, ito yung pangalawa, also by Professor Ong, Professor Curato, and their colleagues, yung pinakabagong study, which I had the privilege of attending, yung public launch nito, they identified worrying new trends. The intensity, the volume, and the sophistication of these architects have reached unprecedented heights. Professor Ong and his colleagues introduced a broader term for this phenomenon. Hindi na lang daw disinformation, but influence operations, emphasizing its expansion from merely seeding and spreading lies to constructing an entire ecosystem that can manipulate perceptions, even values, and belief systems. They mobilize an entire cast of characters to achieve their goals. Yung una, parang simple lang yung mga cast of characters. Pero ngayon, yung mga simpleng trolls, influencers, nadagdagan na. And ito yung in-identify nila in the research.
Now I'd like to give credit to our artist, Tokwa Peña Florida, for our study's cover art and infographics. And as you can see in this cover image, it illustrates the core focus of our study, which is the idea of parallel public spheres. So ito yung konsepto na hindi na magtagpo ang mga realidad o mundo na ating ginagalawan ngayon. This, we argue, is the cumulative impact of disinformation and new forms of influence operations that have run wild for over 6 years. So, isipin natin kung paano yung mga pink, tingin nila sa mga pula ay mga biktima ng historical distortion. Pero sa mga pula, ganun din ang tingin nila sa mga pink o sabihin na natin sa mga dilaw na sila naman ang biktima ng narratives and historical distortion. So people participate now in political realities that align with their hardened political identities. And sa study namin, pinapaliwanag namin na nakaka-alarm ito, parallel na yung mga mundong ginagalawan natin. So these are parallel lines that never intersect, and you can even choose the political reality or universe you might want to live in. So we understand and acknowledge that media and also social media are so important in sustaining this parallel realities and this multiverse, if you will. Na you can choose the broadcast media channel you want, the social media influencer you trust, the news and entertainment show that you want to support. Even scientific expertise has become partisan these days. So you can choose the reality you want. So hindi na tayo nagtatagpo. And bakit ba nagkaganon? So bago namin sagutin kung bakit nagkaganon, I want to emphasize here kung paano muna naiiba yung aming analysis and approach sa ibang mga disinformation researchers and advocates. Of course, we argue that how you interpret the problem really determines what kinds of solutions you're able to advance. A simplistic or reductive understanding of the problem, of the crisis of disinformation, if you will, we argue will lead to superficial solutions. And we want to get to the heart of the problem, the roots of the crisis. So these are the questions that we're engaged with. First, how do we bridge our parallel public spheres? How do we live in difference? Second, how do we assign accountability to the chief architects of disinformation? Third, how can we empower Filipino citizens to be more critical and responsible as participants in our public sphere? So, as you can see, our line of questioning when it comes to addressing disinformation in our democracy is sociological and structural. So we want to support ways of building spaces of learning, spaces in the middle for deliberation and dialogue, how to build trust with communities and meeting them where they are. So, we have published a range of papers where we have developed our line of questioning since 2016, and you can access them again via my link tree. So, now we want to contrast our approach and offer a productive critique with other approaches in disinformation studies and advocacy. And so we want to highlight and critique some blind spots of other approaches. So, uso na ngayon yung mga nagbebenta ng iba't ibang computational tools for bot detection, for hate speech detection. We argue they kind of go after low-level digital villains, but never really the masterminds behind artful and persuasive narratives. We're also quite skeptical of legal solutionism. Yung mga naghahanap ng anti-fake news law that they are hoping would, through one legislation will solve everything. Or um, there are other advocates who are trying to advance the use of defamation or libel laws to target disinformers. We argue that this line of critique will pose dangers to civil liberties and could easily backfire. And we should be looking and comparing the Philippines context with our neighbors in Singapore, Malaysia, also other global south countries like India and Nigeria, where these kinds of legal solutionism have backfired. There are those who are quite dependent on an EU or a US legal approach to hold platforms accountable. And so for some people, they're depending on, an EU code of disinformation to hold Facebook accountable for ruining democracy and hoping that that would solve our problems in the Philippines. And we think and argue that it's a way of perpetuating colonial dependencies and, holding standards of privacy, for example, and depending on those as defined by an EU framework will privilege Western concerns rather than center our own concerns in the Philippines. We're also quite skeptical of name and shame gotcha style reporting and unmasking of low level trolls. We argued that some of these kinds of journalism tend to perpetuate what we call anti-masa sentiments. They perpetuate stereotypes of the bobotante, and of course, the Bobotante as a framework and stereotype has many slippages with the bayaran or the troll. So as my prior research has argued, we have really been trying to advocate and connect with our other colleagues that we shouldn't be wasting energies on low-level trolls or bots and instead go after the top trolls, the masterminds, the chief architects of disinformation who hide in plain sight as political consultants, who are hired as campaign strategists. They are public relations gurus. In fact, it's an open secret who they are, and they benefit from these campaigns. And politicians also protect them and also hold a debt of gratitude and utang na loob to these people. And so we argue that we should not be displacing disinformation as a problem of the massa or young people on TikTok. And I think that's a way of scapegoating. Finally, we engage and collaborate with fact checkers, and we try to um, argue, however, that fact checking can achieve a lot of ways in catching the blatant lies. Pero yung mga hindi obvious na lies, yung mga satire, or also the deeper narratives behind some of these issues, people's feelings of grievances and anxieties are not really addressed in full by fact checking alone. And that's why for our new study, we're trying to reframe our study beyond just catching disinformation or blatant lies, but we're trying to engage with influence operations. So, ito na yung konsepto na ginagamit namin ngayon, recognizing na in 2022, disinformation hindi na lang siya blatant lies or lantarang kasinungalingan or fake news na kumakalat. So, nakita natin during elections na iba't iba na yung mga gimmick when it comes to election campaigns. Hindi naman talagang lantaran na kasinungalingan yung nakikita natin. So some of these strategies are involve creating compelling and artful narratives, positions of victimhood about certain politicians and also about Philippine society at large. So, ano ba yung mga nakita namin? So, this is an infographic that illustrates new campaign innovations in 2022. And this is consistent in our previous reports where we use and collaborate with cartoonists, right, to characterize the different genres or archetypes of itong mga influence operators. And this year, we group them into three: personalities, platforms, and practices. Under personalities, we have knowledge influencers, itong mga pseudo-experts, and yung iba sa kanila may mga PhD na or PhD pa. Senator satirist, and a FAM reactor. So if you want to know more about these, please read our report. You can also listen to my podcast, Catch Me If You Can. I can only give examples, brief examples today. Under platforms, we have partisan broadcast media na may iba-iba ng news channels, bawat partido, and also TikTok. And under practices, we have brigading and canceling. So dahil kulang tayo sa oras, I will only discuss key examples. So unang halimbawa, si Senator Satirist. So sino ba ito? So in the past election cycle, a sitting incumbent senator used her official social media platform to post professionally produced skits where she role plays as a sassy tita, delivering real talk and spilling tea, kumbaga. In the process, delivers coded attacks against then VP Robredo. And this campaign innovation evades fact-checking and social media takedowns through its skillful use of satire, platformed on an elected official's official page. So we bring up the question, to what extent does this social media official channel evade campaign finance rules? Um, and this is not just particular to her, but also other ways of using official channels. We also discussed in our study how senator satirists help evolve the issue of historical distortion during elections. So alam naman natin itong historical distortion or dati tinatawag natin to historical revisionism, dati uso ito as mga crude memes, mga before and after memes na ito yung martial law era, ito yung EDSA era example, 'di ba? Um, Previous studies that we ourselves authored talked about artificially trending hashtags. Yung mga fake hashtags and yung mga Twitter accounts responsible for hashtag ilibing na report namin ito noong 2016 pa. So ito yung mga obvious examples of coordinated behavior or obvious examples of historical distortion. Pero ngayon, in 2022, disinformation at this scale is now a full-service enterprise. So, mga political pundits with PhDs are now able to justify martial law in various ways. It's now beyond just a matter of blatant lies, but we need to analyze it as a strategic performance of false victimhood. So, it sounds like this. Yung pamilya namin, victim kami ng liberal elite politicians, historians, and journalists, and they have suppressed the real truth about martial law. And kung yung pamilya namin naging biktima ng mga liberal elites, kayo din, di ba? So this is a way of them trying to connect with disenfranchised communities. So, to fight all of this, various citizens and organizations have responded creatively, and we call this as an experiment of fighting fire with fire. So, meron ding ibang mga practices of influence operations na naobserbahan namin na dinidepensahan nila yung mga paninindigan nila. So, as a way of pushing back against influence operations ng mga pula. So one example is brigading, which is the term na ginagamit ng Meta platforms to refer to yung mass reporting ng mga bot accounts or troll accounts. For us, brigading offers video game style thrills in bot busting and troll hunting of anonymous low-level villains. Of course, many of us are familiar now with the practice of canceling. And of course, ito yung example na, the best example dito is yung kay Ella Cruz after niya sinabing, history is like chismis. Canceling is when people organize cancel campaigns to call out and withdraw support from celebrities, influencers, even small businesses that might directly or indirectly promote historical distortion. We acknowledge that brigading and canceling have served a critical role in the Philippine public sphere. They protect whatever spaces are left to defend historical truths and assert the presence of a political opposition committed to holding the Marcoses and their allies accountable. But we raise examples and various ways in which these practices could backfire. So, sa obserbasyon namin, nag-aalala kami na baka hindi actually nagwo-work itong mga practices na ito. Itong strategies of fighting fire with fire or mata sa mata. So, remember when Ella Cruz said na after niya ma-cancel online, she talked about having to approach Senator Amy Marcos. And sabi daw niya kay Senator Amy, ma'am, pwede po ba magpahag dahil ilang araw pa lang nababash na ako, hindi ko na kaya. What more kayo? Dekada-dekada na kayong nababash. So, yung lesson namin dito is mukhang pinapaigting lang yung pananaw ng mga Marcoses at ng mga supporters nila na biktima sila ng mga liberal elites, na inaalipusta lang sila ng ibang mga pananaw. So, sa halip na maging effective itong pagka-cancel to hold the person accountable sa sinabi niya na history is like chismis, mas naging kapani-paniwala pa yung kwento nila na bullies itong mga liberals na ito. If you remember, nagkaroon pa ng various academic conferences to call out Ella Cruz. So, could this be a way of reinforcing their narrative na bullies daw tayo ng mga academics? So, um, isang argument namin sa mga report na ito na baka pinapaigting lang niya ang mga mundong hindi nagtatagpo rather than bridge building. So we're very curious to hear from you how you might have different experiences and judgments about cancel culture and brigading, and I'm very keen to hear from you. So, ano naman yung mga solusyon na gusto naming i-suggest sa aming community engagement plan? So, the objective of our community engagement plan is to bridge our parallel public spheres. We want to create spaces in the middle for listening, deliberation, and critical discussions. For us, it's important to knit our families and friendships together in difference. So for us, it's about how to live together in parallel public spheres. Yun yung objective namin dito. Hindi namin objective mag-name and shame or hindi namin objective na paigtingin pa itong mundong hindi nagtatagpo. So for us, we are trying to advance a hopeful plan that wants to empower ordinary people. Ordinary people we recognize as active agents capable of political deliberation. And so we want to promote these recommendations as a starting point for us to explore new collaborations. And meron din kaming offer for a very modest seed fund. So nananawagan kami sa iba't ibang mga participants kahit dito sa nawala sa live forum na ito, kung gusto niyong sumubok na gumawa ng interventions and want to collaborate with us, meron kaming maliit na pondo na in US dollars, $1,500 for anyone who wants to pitch ideas and collaborations with us. And habang okay pa yung US dollar to Philippine exchange rate, please, we're keen to collaborate with you. So, first recommendation is to change the narrative around disinformation. So, we argue that digital literacy initiatives should be empowering citizens rather than perpetuating anti-masa sentiments. There's a tendency kasi for some disinformation interventions to reinforce social class divisions, usually in discourses that blame the bobo, the uneducated, or those with cheap phones on Facebook free basics as the disinformers. So we want to change this narrative as it directly plays into populist assumptions about the elitist liberals and gives them more ammunition for the information war. So we want to pivot and support new storytelling projects, investigative journalism, and pre-bunking videos that punch up rather than down, that focus on political masterminds running the show, and discussing social narratives more broadly rather than naming and shaming individual YouTube vloggers and blaming them for their lack of education. Another recommendation. So I'm an educator and my collaborators are academics as well. So we recognize the importance of creating open access educational materials. We want to empower citizens to have more access to educational materials. So we want to create an open access course. We want to popularize critical research and communicate findings with diverse ethno-linguistic and age groups. So our experience working with some news agencies is sometimes they're still skeptical to help popularize academic research, thinking that the massa might not sell with the massa. We want to challenge that assumption and want to make available more resources rather than gatekeep them. So we want to collaborate with librarians, for example, who might want to help curate all of these resources na ang dami ng studies na nakakalat. We need to put them all together in one website. We also want to collaborate, for example, with psychologists who might want to develop conversation guides, practical tools, how to talk to our lolo or to our tito, even our teacher who might believe in a different political reality than us. Third suggestion is to introduce more pain points to address the Philippines' homegrown local disinformation economies. So yung iba kasi, ang gusto nila or yung tendency is disinformation, let's hunt for the trolls na perhaps operated by China or Russia or various bots online. So for us, we want to actually focus on local disinformation economies, and let's begin with our local advertising and public relations firms. How can we engage with these communities better? So for us, this might involve creating a media buyer collective, connect us critical researchers with media buyer collectives, educate them about the most notorious YouTube channels responsible for disinformation or historical distortion, for example, that their paid advertising might support. So we're inspired by Check My Ads Institute here in the United States who study ad technology. So makikita natin kung sino ba, whether San Miguel ba or Coca-Cola, baka nagpe-play sila ng ads dito sa mga notorious channels that support historical distortion. At the same time, we need to engage advertising and PR people to discuss how they are complicit or perhaps directly responsible with getting political consultancies and doing it in the down low without accountability. So, how can we do this further? One concrete example is to support whistleblowers who might want to expose these disinformation for hire operations. So, para sa atin sa Pilipinas, we need to have uncomfortable discussions about worker ethics and justice. Dahil alam naman natin na itong mga hateful political campaigns, they operate as industry open secrets. So I think we need to create worker support and protection mechanisms for whistleblowers who might want to expose operations from within advertising and PR firms. So, for those of you who might be familiar with my podcast, Catch Me If You Can, a podcast produced by Puma Podcast and co-hosted by investigative journalist Kat Ventura, we've been listening to troll operators and itong mga meme factory operators, mga influencers who are enlisted for political campaigns. And if you've listened to episode 1 of Catch Me If You Can, akala nung troll yung magiging niyang account ay for a corporate brand. Nagulat na lang siya, ay politician pala, si mayor pala yung aking magiging kliyente and kailangan ko pala gumawa ng attack memes. So this operates as industry open secrets. But how can we protect people like this whistleblower? How can we create legal support mechanisms for anyone who might want to blow the whistle on advertising and PR firms, or even blow the whistle about Facebook, Twitter, TikTok operations and their lack of accountability when it comes to supporting their own content moderators, for example. We need to create these whistleblower mechanisms, such as how there are support mechanisms for a whistleblower like Frances Haugen here in the United States to expose Facebook's operations at the headquarters level. So we need to similarly support workers at the local level. So, for us, this podcast has led to great interest and public participation and volunteerism. We need to create and scale up these kinds of mechanisms to support whistleblowers. So, I want to play some examples from our podcast.
When I saw my professor, I saw my college instructor, or he's still a journalist to this very day. Nagkaroon siya ng one-on-one interview with our client. And then nagulat siya na, oh, nandito ka. Sabi niya, hindi ko, kay ano ka na pala nag-work? Sabi ko, opo sir, ganyan. O, kamusta ka naman? Parang chilling effect yun. Kasi nakita mo yung taong nagturo sa'yo at graduate ka ng 4 years of college. And then makikita niya na nandito ka. You're doing the exact same thing that your teachers told you not to do. My college professor, I saw him dead in the eye and looking at me na parang he must be thinking, oh, he must be so disappointed with one of his students. And fresh grad ako noon, so impossible na hindi na kami matandaan kasi kakagraduate ko lang eh. So, medyo fresh pa kaming student sa memory niya. Tapos, parang sabi ko sa sarili ko, parang, what am I doing with my life?
So now, this is the final slide. Once again, our research team is looking for organizations, individuals who might take forward any of our ideas and want to pursue new collaborations, whether research interventions or new practical tools that might popularize critical research, develop worker collectives in ad and PR in our tech industries, design teaching materials, curate conversation guides that aim for depolarization, and those that might study ad technologies in the Philippines. So email us at communityengagementplan2022@gmail.com. I'd like to end by saying these are real, concrete opportunities for collaboration. We are also supporting new voices to participate with us. And we, as researchers, acknowledge that we don't hold all the answers. And you, as creative professionals, as young researchers, and also experts in your own fields, you might see and interpret these questions in very different ways, and we want to learn from you and empower you as well. Thank you.